Yeah. 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 Yeah.
So here's the thing. John Wick is one of the best action movies of the 2010s, and one of the best pieces of American action cinema ever made. It upped the ante for what Western audiences expect from their action films and from their performers. Keanu Reeves is a god among men who put in an absolutely insane amount of training for this movie, while also delivering an incredibly impactful performance that started the Keanu-sance that we have been living through for almost a decade now. Now, most of you are probably thinking to yourselves, I mean, yeah, Steve, that's the most uncontroversial take you've ever had. So here's a potentially controversial one. The sequels are also great. And I know what you're thinking again. I mean, that's not really that controversial, dude. Like, the sequels are well received amongst both critics and fans. What the hell are you talking about? Are you dense? And yes, the general audiences and critics like these movies. But if you look at the discussion online, there's quite a big following of people who don't really like the sequels. Hell, I've been saying for years that I'd make a video about the John Wick sequels, specifically because I have friends who don't like them. And with Chapter 4 coming out soon, I'd figured now was a perfect time to do it, and tackle the sequels from this angle. John Wick kind of makes his own sequels. So before I explain that wild-ass thought, let me backtrack a little and talk about John Wick, the character. I think it's pretty easy to say that John Wick in the original movie has a relatable and somewhat understandable motivation. Like, just look at that whole face. I'd turn into the Harbinger of Death too if someone killed my dog, which, quick side note, these movies are marketed towards men, right? Like, I think that's a pretty fair reading of their target demographic. So I ask you this, fellas, have you ever shown the women in your life this movie? Because I've shown exactly 3 women in my life this movie over the years, and none of them particularly like violence or action movies all that much. But all of them really like this movie, and I think it's all because they also love dogs. Okay, side note over, I just had to get that out in the world, because I don't know if anyone's had, like, a similar experience. I don't know, please tell me. Anyway, John Wick. It's a very simple revenge quest, albeit complicated by John's adherence to rules of the world in which he abides. John can't just kill Yosef because he is protected by systems that prevent this. John's solution, which inadvertently carries over to the sequels, is to dismantle those systems to accomplish any and all goals he may have. Put another way, this entire franchise is John has a target. The target is in a house. John's solution is to burn the whole house down. And all of it is driven by John's inexplicably deep grief. He did the impossible, he got out, and when he lost his reason to keep going, when his pain could not get deeper, the one tool he had to alleviate said pain was taken from him for shits and giggles. I know this isn't a reading that's particularly profound or insightful. John basically spells all this out in the best scene in the movie, but it's important to understand these elements before diving into why and how John creates his own sequels. John is driven by an anguish created by a world around him that seems only invested in taking from him. The first movie is one that doesn't exactly need a sequel, but it absolutely had room for one. Chapter 2 not only wraps up the thread from the first movie about John's car, but it solidifies Winston's assertion from the first movie that John can't just pop in and out of crime without seeing the consequences of his actions come back to bite him in the ass. Chapter 2 focuses on John's pure and utter agony and the life he left behind and being forced to return to it. The first movie was pretty easy to relate to because John exacted revenge on someone who wronged him. This one is relatable because John has someone wrong him, and this time he just kinda has to eat shit and put up with it if he wants to live. It's a question of how far we can push John before he breaks, how many times can he break until he shatters, and how much more can this man be subject to the rules and consequences of his world before he just needs to break them. John's decision to shoot Santino is an understandable yet inexcusable one. While we want to celebrate John getting his get back on Santino, we also know that he just swan dived straight to rock bottom. John has, in a sense, prolonged his story by being unable to simply walk away, and this is his fatal flaw going forward. John doesn't know when to quit. Chapter 3 puts this into pretty sharp clarity, I think. Most of this movie is people telling John that he needs to stop, and him responding with indifference and a 9x19 parabellum. It is the entire system itself pushing against John, and John pushing back. Unstoppable force, immovable object. Demonstrated even more clearly when the other unstoppable force of the series, Winston, surrenders to the high table. The problem with John being an unstoppable force is that he really should stop at this point. The thing John needs most is to move on and find peace, and unfortunately, the easiest path to that exists under the table. It's an easy out, as easy of an out as he could have gotten, especially coming from someone who recognizes the cycle John exists in. Which, just take a shot every time I talk about some cycle of violence on this channel. But that's John's biggest problem. He can't just take an easy out, because he's been wrong too much and just needs everyone to know just how hurt he is. Even if it means it'll eventually get him killed, even if it means that he'll never know the peace he so desperately craves, John needs to hurt the world back. He can't help it. He hits rock bottom and he starts digging. I haven't seen John Wick Chapter 4 as the time of writing this, but the whole movie seems to be built around the idea that John is getting another out. And since we already know Chapter 5 is coming at some point, I can almost guarantee you he's gonna fuck up this opportunity too. Because John Wick creates his own sequels. Special thanks to my buddy Omar for donating to the $10 tier on my Patreon. If you want to help the channel out and support everything we do while also getting exclusive benefits, then pledge your fealty over on Patreon. It really helps me out and you guys have no idea how much I appreciate it.